Health Days, a week of events where we're discussing various digital health strategies across Europe. Today, we're going to talk about Israel, which is not in the EU, but has been known for being very digitally advanced. It's a startup nation. It's a country of roughly 9 million people that attributes 7.5% of its GDP to healthcare, which is actually a little bit less than many of the European countries. So today we're going to hear a bit more about the latest digital strategy of Israel and the aspects that they are taking to manage healthcare in the best possible manner. I would like to welcome our guests that are with us today. With me here in the studio, we have Mr. Yuri Shorli, who is the CEO of the Hospital to Poštena. Then we've got Mr. Bogdan Tušar, who is the Acting Director General of the Directorate for the Development of the Health System from the Slovenian Healthcare Ministry. And virtually on Zoom, we've got 3 speakers with us today. Ms. Esti Sheli, Director for Digital Health at the Ministry of Health in Israel. Hello, Esti. Are you with us?
Yes. Hi. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. We are going to hear from Esti quite soon about, she's going to give us a short presentation about the state of healthcare in Israel. We also have Ms. Noah Kedem, Deputy Director for the Digital Health Unit at the Maccabi Health Services. Hello, Noah.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
And also Mr. Michael Halbertal, General Director of Rambam Healthcare Campus, which is one of the 5 biggest hospitals in Israel. Hello.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you as well. So before we go into the panel discussion, we are going to have more than enough time to open many questions. But just to understand the Israel situation a little bit better, I would now invite Ms. Esti Sheli to give us a short presentation.
Thank you very much. I will share my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Great. So thank you for the intro, and I will try to do it really, really brief since we have only about 10 minutes. So just you started to give some of the numbers of Israel. So as you said, it's about 9 million people. Today, we are spending about 8% of our GDP on health, and the results, the health outcomes are pretty good, definitely related to Europe and the US. You need to understand that the Israeli healthcare system is mostly public. We have a national health insurance law, and we have 4 HMOs. Noah here from Maccabi is from the 2nd largest HMO in Israel. And we have 45 general hospitals, and Miki here is the head of one of the hospitals, one of the largest hospitals here in Israel. We have about 14 mental health and rehab hospitals in Israel. So in number-wise, you can see that it's not a very large system. What is interesting about it, and this is one of the advantages of the Israeli healthcare system, is that you can put in not a very large room most of the Israeli healthcare system altogether. One of the strengths and the unique strengths, as you mentioned in the intro, is the industry, the digital health industry and sector here in Israel. We see, as you can see the numbers, we see multinational companies that are active here in Israel, and more than 50 hubs, accelerators, innovation centers. Many of them are within hospitals and HMOs and other health organizations. And all of that together bring Israel to become a very vibrant scene in digital health. Today, we have more than 600 digital health companies active in Israel. This is without counting the medical device companies, which is about another 500 companies. And when you're looking on the trends, you can see that the funding and the investments that we see in Israel is rising. You see here the numbers from 2014. In 2020, we saw the number of about $800 million investments in Israel in the field of digital health. Early stage, late stage, and mostly, of course, not government funds. But as you asked me to talk about also about the Israeli healthcare system. So Israel is not very different from other developed countries. We see aging population. Israel has a positive growth rate of the population. We have high rate of children. I myself have 3 kids. This is, let's say, the average in Israel. It's 3.1 kids per family. So I'm about the average. We see increase in chronic diseases in Israel, and the prices of drugs and medical technologies, again, very similar to the trends that we see worldwide. On top of that, we see the growth in the public expectations. They are really not willing to wait long times to see a physician or to get a treatment. And on the other hand, we see a lack of physicians and other health professionals, which is actually become a very serious problem here in Israel. So we are calling it the perfect storm, and together with the COVID pandemic, become really interesting times to be in healthcare in Israel and worldwide. But we are trying in Israel to look on the strength that we have, the data, the startup nation, very strong R&D technology and medicine in Israel, and to take all of this together to see how we as a government can support this. So a few years ago, Israel passed a government resolution of digital health as a growth engine, which put a very ambitious 3 goals of bringing Israel to become one of the world leaders in digital health solutions, focusing on the industry, focusing on clinical and academic research, and of course on the healthcare system. And we are trying to promote this, looking on the data and the R&D to make Israel a strong and supportive environment for R&D in clinical data, but also in clinical trials, not only on digital health tools. And of course, we would like to see the improvement in the improvement and implementation of digital health solutions in the healthcare services, which is our goal. Give some examples, and we try to stop soon. So just some numbers from the last 2 years. For example, in the last year, we supported 46 telemedicine services at 24 hospitals. This was part of a program that we have done during the COVID pandemic. We saw many of the hospitals gave telemedicine services, but not necessarily had the relevant infrastructure in place. Sometimes we found all kinds of solutions. Israelis are very good in inventing new solutions, but when we are trying to look ahead and to see that we want to see those solutions sustainable and secure, so we brought some funds to support some of those services. Similar to that, we have done with the HMOs, and we are trying to put all kinds of innovation tools, like how to support pilots. So Israelis tech companies will pilot their solutions in Israeli health organizations. So we as a government, together with the Innovation Authority, support pilots in, you can see the numbers, more than 50 pilots altogether in Israeli health organizations. And we are also supporting in the R&D infrastructure in health organizations. I will stop here, so we'll have enough time for the panel discussion, which I'm sure will be interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Esti, for the nice presentation. Perhaps just to kind of counter a little bit what you said, or to give you a little bit of an insight into how the Slovenian healthcare system is working, I would ask Mr. Tušar to perhaps share what do you see, as the biggest digitalization related strengths of the Slovenian healthcare systems, and what are perhaps the priorities for the future. In the last 4 days, we saw quite a lot of presentations about Slovenia, Portugal, Germany, and Finland, and we can say that Slovenia has been fast in some solutions, such as having the national backbone since 2015, having e-prescription since 2016, and e-referrals since 2017.
Yes, thank you for the question. And also I would like to say hello to our Israeli colleagues. What they have done, I think it is astonishing. So good practices shows that we can build a good system of digitalization also in our place. So about the digitalization in Slovenia, we should go back into the year 2005 when the first strategic document on that field was adopted. And from the, as you said, year 2016, an ongoing process of digitalization is going on in Slovenia, with building some new solutions like the e-health system, which consists out of e-prescription, electronic prescription, electronic appointments, central register for patients, and patient support portal, just to mention some of these. When we are speaking about the healthcare system and digitalization in Slovenia, I have to point out that European Commission set Slovenia on the 6th place among all European countries. So our system is quite advanced and modern, as I say, but there are still possibilities to go further. So now we are drafting a new strategic plan for the new years to come. So the new strategy is going to be built with the help of DG reform. So what are the main goals, you asked? The main goals are, of course, to unify patients register and to set a new national framework for telemedicine. I think this is a very important issue that will be set in the next years. So we are building our new strategy also on the plan which set out some resilience and reactive plan for the European Commission according to the last COVID situation. So it is very important to develop good, efficient, flexible digital solutions to bring a good healthcare system in the future, of course, and this is our main issue in the Ministry of Health. And what is important is that we want to include all main stakeholders in Slovenia to build together the strategy for the next year. And we have just started, as I said before, and I think we are on a good way to really bring and prepare some good solutions, and especially the good practices that we have heard in previous from previous speakers on eHealth Week. I think it is very good. So building a network is also important to us to bring some new ideas, some new solutions also into the Slovenian healthcare system.
Thank you. Because we're going to focus a lot on the healthcare system in Israel and to better understand it, I would now go to Noah Kedim from the Maccabi Health Services. Can you explain a little bit what are the differences between the 4 HMOs that are running in Israel, and how do you manage or interchange the data between the 4 systems?
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. In Israel, as ST mentioned, we have 4 HMOs. They're all, of course, regulated by the government, and it's spread out throughout the country. So there's no clear geographical classification, but every citizen can choose to which HMO he will be connected with. In terms of data, there are a lot of things going on. There's a huge, the main thing is a huge national project which shares the data between all the health organizations, not only within between the HMOs, but also with hospitals. It's actually coming live these days, and it's amazing. So if a patient moves from one HMO to another HMO, the data can be, the health data of that patient can be seen by the new HMO. All the health organization send their data, and of course it's secured to a main place, and all the other health organizations can look at it. Also in the hospitals, if a patient gets hospitalized, then the doctors in the hospitals can or will, it depends if this hospital already joined the program, but everyone are coming to live these days, right, Esti? It's just coming up, and it's absolutely amazing. So sharing data in this sense is great. I must say that it's not yet shared in a coded way. Okay, so we don't have, we can't yet communicate, let's say, in FHIR or other SNOMED or other known languages, but this is also things that we are working on, and projects like this are already taking place. Here at Maccabi, we take a lot of investment putting together the FHIR language and the SNOMED into our EHR. Already some of it already is done, and we are going on. We're very progressed in this, and we also engage our partners in the ecosystem to join us. We work a lot on this engagement with hospitals and other parties, and I can see this coming up very soon. So I think it's a matter of months or a few years that we will see the Israeli community communicating in this interoperability way.
Thank you. Esti, perhaps can you add a little bit more information to that in terms of how is the Ministry of Health approaching the digital health strategy? What kind of budget are you allocating for this development? And what are kind of the main things that you want to improve? What do you see as the key focus points on your agenda at the moment?
Okay, thank you. I will add to some of the things that Noah had just mentioned. So, for example, Leitan, the health information exchange network that Noah was mentioning, is already available in most of the hospitals in Israel, and now coming also to the HMOs. And this is one solution that helps us to securely share clinical information among professionals. It's not available for the patients. It's available only for the physicians and the nurses, etc., that are taking care of the patient. But it is very important that we look at it as a life-saving platform. this is an example of a technology platform that we as a government actually funding and developing and implementing. And we're also responsible for the policy and the regulation related to that. I must tell you that really brings many very, very difficult ethical questions in place, because just the question who you give access to such a vast clinical information, and you would like, of course, every physician would like to see all the information about the patient when he's taking care of the patient, but you need to balance between the right of privacy of the patient and to the fact that you would like to give him the best medical treatment available. So this is one solution that is a good example of technology that the government is investing in. But many of our actions are actually on the field of policy, regulations, and we are doing also a lot of acceleration programs. We believe that in Israel we have a very strong health organizations. Noah and Miki here are coming from both organizations that have a very strong IT and digital departments. They don't need, in many of the cases, they don't need the government to, actually the government probably will just do more problems than help in this field, but they have a very strong IT and digital departments, and they need sometimes funds to do this. They need sometimes that we will help them to prioritize on, because they have, of course, many other important things. And so we are trying to promote, Noah mentioned the interoperability and the FIRE that we are promoting now in Israel, with a vision of looking how we would like to see health data portability for patients in the end. So the patient will be able to have access to his personal health record in a way that he can make a significant use of it. The other main issue that we are focusing on is how we make a very good use in telemedicine. The numbers that we have saw during the last 18 months we believe that will increase, but we need to make sure that we are doing safe and equal access telemedicine services. So we are putting a lot of efforts on this field. And I think I will stop here, but this is like the main, so the data, the clinical data, and to make sure that it will be accessed by the patient and the physician and the right organization, and to make sure that the data is connected in a way that both sides can make use of it, and to make sure that we are doing and giving a good telehealth services.
Thank you. At this point, I would ask Mr. Michael Halbertar, you're the director of the Rambam Hospital. Can you give us a clinical perspective on the IT structure that you have inside the hospital and in Israel? So perhaps you can also go through a very plastic example of what happens when the patient enters the hospital, what documents does he need to have, where do you get the data from about the patient, and what kind of data can you access?
So I hope you can hear me. Yes. So as said, I'm the Director General of the Rambam Healthcare Campus. Rambam, just to give you an idea, we are located in the northern part of Israel. We are the only tertiary care center in the northern part of Israel, so we cover about 2.3 million people. It's 1,100 bed academic facility. We are affiliated with the Technion. So it's an extremely busy center. When you look at the EMR system or the digitalization of the system, the healthcare system in Israel, basically you have files of patient before birth till after death. So the one layer is obviously the availability of the information on patients, and the fact that we are a hospital, we are a government hospital, but they are one of the HMOs have hospitals. There is the army. There is many facilities that has different ownership, but the fact of the matter, it doesn't matter what kind of a system you use, but it interconnects, and you can see the information between us. So if a patient arrives into the hospital, for instance, from Noah, from Maccabi, and he arrives into the hospital, first he doesn't need to bring anything. He just walks into the hospital. And once he walks into the hospital, and with any kind of a complaint, we can enter the data that has on the patient in the community. Obviously, in sake of privacy, I cannot just in the morning decide to go to a patient in Maccabi and see what's going on with. I can enter to the data when the patient arrives into the hospital. This is my confirmation that I can access the data. By the way, really interesting point, because when we talk about data, one of the issues that it raises is the issues of privacy. And there's lots of emphasis around the world talking about privacy and you know, the issues of sharing data. And in Israel, it was decided when we implemented the system that we will let the citizens to opt out. Obviously, everybody is opt-in, but you are allowed to opt out without any reasoning. You just have to go to the HMO and says, I don't want you to transfer my data. And if you look, Israel is 9.3 million people. The amount of people that are requested to opt out is STA is 0.00001 or something like this.
It's very low, yeah.
So it's non-significant. So I think obviously we have to look at the issues of privacy. I'm not underestimating the issues of privacy, but I think that the systems and you know lawyers make out of it more that it really is, because the patients and the citizens understand the benefit that they get out of the system if all of us see the patients and the information. So once the patient arrives into our emergency room, we look at the data. By the way, we monitor this. This is a quality measure for us to see how many emergency docs or in the ward, how much they are using the system. We expect that every physician that once he sees a new patient, it will go into the data, because obviously it gives you more information. We know that part as clinicians, part of the information you do not get from the patient. You ask patient questions, and you know, diabetes, they live with the diabetes. They don't see it as a sickness sometimes, but this is a very important information. So it's not that they are hiding the information. They don't see the significance or transferring the information, especially when they came for, you know, headache, you know, what's the connection? So we expect the physician to look into the data, and then it saves lots of efforts, because if this patient that came with a headache in the community, the physician decided to send him to do a CT scan, there's no reason for me to do another CT scan 48 hours later. So all the information is done. And at the same time, the community physician, he gets an alert that the actual physician, or he sent the physician, the patient into the hospital. He can go and see what's going on with this patient while he is being hospitalized. And obviously, once you discharge a patient and you move him back to the community services, all the data goes back into the community services, and they can see exactly what's going on. And basically, obviously, the patient themselves already bring the discharge summaries, but really they don't need to, because there is access to all the information during the system. So this is one thing. But when you talk about the digitalization of the system, is what do you do with the information? So, and I just would like to, with 2 minutes, share with you, you know, so the idea is, obviously, once you computerize and you have an EMR, obviously it's good that you can see all the data. But the question, when I looked at it as a hospital management, what do I do with the data? How all this data helps us in order to be more efficient, run the hospital, get more ideas. Obviously, going to research, this is another issue. let me share with you one screen. This is the dashboard that we use. The COVID is the issue now, you know, what we would do without COVID. But this is obviously it's in Hebrew, so you don't understand. I will just briefly show you once we have all the information, this is how we run the hospital. Because here you see how many patients we have now with COVID, confirmed COVID. How many were accepted since 7 o'clock in the morning? What's the acuity? 14, well, basically 40 of them are in a serious and critical situation. We had also already 2,500 patients with COVID in the hospital. We can see how many ventilated patients we have in the hospital. 14 of them are COVID, but we have other 70 patients ventilated in the hospital. This is an important information for me to know how many ventilators we have, how many patients were discharged, you know, from 7 o'clock in the morning, none still were discharged, how many died since 7 o'clock in the morning, how many died from the beginning. So, and we can see, for instance, that if we look at the wave, the current wave, the overall mortality from the beginning was 14%. But this fourth wave, it's over 20%. How many patients in the emergency room? Where are the patients located? We can see what are the trends. This is the trend of the patient, and we can see it from the beginning. This is from March 2020, and we can see the different waves, exactly what happened in the hospital throughout the waves, and this is the current wave. How many people die? Look at this. It's all these black cubes. It's how many people died. And what we see now differently, for instance, because we have our own system, it's short circuit. 3 days ago, I said, I need to know more information about the emergency room. I spoke to my IT people. I say, I want to concentrate on the emergency room. And I have all the information about the emergency room, how many were accepted since 1 o'clock, but then we can see the trend. We can see major difference. This is how many patients we had in the emergency room from the beginning of COVID. And we can see that in this wave, many more patients. We have 20, 26 patients a day coming to our hospital with COVID. And this is a major issue because each one have to have an isolation room. We can see how many patients, or how many of our staff are vaccinated. 96, 98% of the staff is vaccinated. We can see over here how many of our staff are in isolation. How many were recently got COVID. Since the beginning, we are almost 6,000 of staff. Half of them had to go to isolation. So all those information, it's what do you do with the data is sometimes more important with the data itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Halbertal. And at this point, given that you mentioned COVID and the management of pandemic, I would like to ask STA if you could offer us a little bit more background in terms of how was the pandemic managed in Israel. You were very successful and very fast with vaccinations, and you know, the international media was reporting about how fast things got back to normal in Israel after the vaccines were on the market. So given the information dashboard that we just saw, does the Ministry of Health have something similar? How do you make decisions in terms of lockdowns, in terms of restrictions, especially now when the vaccines are already available and the situation is a little bit different than it was last year when we didn't even have testing available?
I must say I don't feel comfortable to contribute or maybe even to relate to how decisions are made. I would, because I'm not part of the decision makers tables on the COVID, but I will say that we do have a dashboard, national dashboard, that is open to the public daily, and you can explore the data. And we are also sharing some of the data even we call it like data.gov, if you're familiar with the concept, that you can see like Excel sheets or CSV files that you can explore and analyze the data. And if you're a Twitter user, you can see that there are many people on Twitter that become really like a public figures that analyzing the MOH data and giving new insights and new studies of how you can look on the different data. We have some groups from Weizmann Institute and some even just private people.
Thank you.
Let me.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think that, just to help Shelley, because I'm more on the clinical side. But again, I think that you have to see it with your own eyes. I will show you the open dashboard that, you can enter the actual dashboard. Where is it? 2 seconds. Here. This is the national dashboard, and you can see lots of information. This is the new cases for the last 24 hours. How many active cases? How many in critical condition? This is the amount of the vaccinated. This is the Israel numbers. The first dose, second dose, third dose. Mortality. What's the percentage of the confirmed cases? It's 7.65%. From 151,000 tests that were done. We can see what's going on according to areas. We can see all the information here about how many confirmed, what are the trends, and we can drill down to each and every settlement, every town around Israel. And we can see all the information that we have. Everybody can enter this, and this is part of the dashboard of the Ministry of Health.
Thank you. We do have something similar here in Slovenia. The difference only probably is that the dashboard that's available for here, it was actually a bottom-up approach by a few experts and enthusiasts. So it's a completely voluntary project called Sledi, which was presented on Monday, and I can perhaps share that link with you a little bit later. We talked a lot about, the meaning of data for clinical decision making, and at this point, I would perhaps give the word to Mr. Surely. You are a clinician yourself. You're leading a hospital in Polšica. What's the state of digitalization in your institution, and where do you see the future innovations are going to support healthcare? Because when you've got fast access to patient data and information, you can offer better care.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for the invitation. Now we mainly hear about using data for the management of the system or the hospitals. But where we see the main importance of the data is in decision making when you treat the patient or when you need the data for the diagnosis. So orientation of the digitalization in the hospital is the usage of this data for the help of the doctors when they treat the patient or when they see the patient or before even they see. I have to say that in the last years, the system in Slovenia has made an enormous step forward. Availability of the data with connecting all the, let's say, medical providers in Slovenia in the same spine in e-health made an digitalization decision making in the hospital easier. It was already mentioned, the e-prescription and things like that made us available to get the data, what was for the patient prescribed over the whole Slovenian medical system. We can get the data of their previous ambulatory hospital visit practically all over the Slovenia. And that's one of the cornerstones when we start dealing with the patient. So in the hospital, we try now to put all the data collected from the patient in our hospital in the same system, giving the doctor help in decision making. So with the data starting a sort of tool which at the end of the day takes care of the data in the meaning of if the data for the certain type of diagnosis was collected in the right way, in the right time, if all the data for the further decision-making is already collected, or do we need something else to do? It notifies us if there is a mistake or not. It also reduces the number of involuntary mistakes regarding therapy distribution for the patient, exams and things like that. In the future, we're looking how to bring the system to the patient, not the patient to the system. So one of our future project is, we call it drone. So it's an or air vehicles without direct driving from the person, sort of automated way of collecting medical samples from the region that will allow us to get the patient samples, blood samples or other samples, without needing the patient going to the hospital or to the center where he give this sample. He can stay in his own town. We have to know that Slovenia is geographically quite diverse, and getting to the center is in certain areas quite difficult, and with that we're going to bring the system to the patient, also to the areas where this normal traffic connections isn't as available as in other places. So that's one of the systems which we try to bring the system to the patient. The other one is collecting those different data for the patient, predominantly at the moment for the patient with lung cancer, treating them and making the right decision at the right moment when to change the therapy or to introduce new therapy or to start different type of therapy or to expand the diagnosis procedures and laboratory tests.
Thank you. You mentioned drones, so I think it's time for us to move to healthcare innovation, and Israel here has a lot to share in terms of working with startups, testing solutions, funding solutions. And before we get their perspective, I would ask Mr. Tušar, in Slovenia, we often feel that innovation is entering healthcare very slowly. So can you perhaps tell us a little bit more about the process of new solutions entering in the healthcare clinical practice, and then we can perhaps go to Israel. And if you have any questions for the colleagues on Zoom, feel free to, ask them a question yourself.
Yes, what Mr. Shorley said before, it is very important. So bringing patient to the system, not system to the patient. And I know the Bolnišnica Topolšica, I think they are quite innovative, and this is the way how also other hospitals should go their own way, making and seeking for the new solutions, for the new ways of how to be closer to the patient. And of course, the Ministry of Health will support those ideas and those initiatives. I think this is very important to build a national strategy, how to support those ideas that are really very good. What was also very important, I think, it is how to share data, because we really need data in a present time, good data that supports decision-making process of the key healthcare providers. So this is also our aim, to provide innovative solutions, how to bring data to those people who actually deal with the treatment process of the patients, because they need good data, and this is also very important. So that's why the main issue for the ministry is to build a really unified, unique patient's record, electronically patient's record in the future that will bring some solutions on that way.
What about innovations such as startup solutions? Can you just briefly explain what is the process of a new solution entering the clinical practice and being reimbursed?
Well, I think we are not quite used of such solutions, but I think they are very good because they have some new, fresh ideas that can be bring closely together. And just, I think, that's why the Ministry of Health has invited many, as I said before, stakeholders to bring new, fresh ideas, to see new good practices, not only from the Slovenian point of view, but also from abroad, to collect those ideas and to somehow bring them into our system. That's why we also support the technical help from the European Union that will support and bring us help on the fields that maybe we are not so strong at that point. So I think that our way is to really bring and to hear good ideas, good practices, like we have heard the practices from the Bolnišnica Topolšica. And this is what is important for us, and these are the advantages also for our future.
Thank you. Esti Shelley before mentioned that there are nearly 700 digital health companies in Israel and 50 accelerators. HMOs work with startups, clinicians and hospitals work with startups. Noah first, and then Mr. Halbertal. Could you tell us what's your approach to working with startups? What's the process? How do they get in? How do you evaluate them? Just a little bit about that. Noah first.
Yes, thank you. So indeed, there's a lot of opportunities in Israel for us as an HMO to connect with startups, and the main thing that we think before we start the process of evaluating the startup and the technology is how this solution answers a challenge that we face. So we're constantly looking at our challenges. We're trying to understand what are the real challenges that we need to tackle in order to bring this vast value with this connecting to a startup. This is from one hand, and on the other hand, we also meet regularly, very much involved in all kinds of startups meetings and meetups and ideas. We meet a lot of startups all the time, and all the time we look for the match between a challenge that we have and a startup that is making up a new technology or a process. Once we have this match, it's a process. It's not a one person looking at the startup. It meets a lot of parties within the organization. We look at it from clinical way, clinical aspects, legal aspects, safety, risk assessment, security aspects, technology aspects, financial. Of course, it has to have some win-win financial solution. Otherwise, it won't hold. Okay, and once we have this clearance from all the parties, we come up with a partnership. It is a partnership. So we as a HNO, we're not a startup, and we do have some organization that raise up startups, but it's very small and it's not our main business. So we do need the startups. It's natural partners for us to bring in innovation into the community, and eventually it must be a win-win contract. So the startup needs to gain their value from access to the data, to the processes, from our ability to implement processes in a huge population. In Maccabi, it's 2.5 million patients. And this is from one hand, and on the other hand, Maccabi as an HMO must get their immediate and clear value for challenges we're facing. And of course, they're also involved with reimbursements and royalties in this partnership. It goes together, but it always must be a win-win.
Can you just perhaps add what is the financial structure of these collaborations? You mentioned it a little bit, but just so when a startup comes to you and you start working together, do they still get financed primarily from the funding that they got from their investors? And if the solution turns out to be successful and useful, then you reimburse it. How does timeline of funding go?
Yes, in general, that's how it goes. The startup comes with the initial investment that they have. They usually already have some kind of beta product, so they have something. It's not theoretical, and then we develop it together. So they use the infrastructure and the data and the processes and the feedback from our patients and doctors and clinicians into their product. And that's how the product is developed together. And then afterwards, when it comes a big success, usually the HMO is free to use this technology for free. It's a partnership, so we've been part of this development. And of course, there come some kinds of royalties from future incomes. That's the main. There are all kinds of course, there are all kinds of ways to contract, but the main principles, it's around this.
Mr. Halbertal, can you also add your perspective to that? So do startups ever come directly to you? And when that happens, do you directly include them in the HMOs? How does that process go?
So obviously the first mandate that we have is to treat patients. And to give the best medical care. But the philosophy of the hospital that as important and is to deal with innovation and startup. And it's not nice to have, to our mind, or is that it's critical. It's we will not be relevant if we will not be involved in innovation and research. And in order to do that, we have few things. First, we have our own research institute that looks in mostly on transitional research. We are really little because we have the faculty, medical faculty adjacent to us. They deal with the basic science. The second thing that we have our own medtech company. So all those relationships and agreements are going through the Rambam medtech company. The third is that we are partnering in an incubator called MindUp, and we, with IBM, Pitango, Medtronic, and ourselves share this incubator, and we have companies over there. Now, the collaboration or the agreement that we have with the different startup, it depends on exactly what does the startup need. If the startup needs just data, obviously, because we are totally computerized for 25 years and we have extremely high quality, deep data, this is one thing. So if they are looking for to get data for them to be able to check their innovation, this is the one thing. And obviously, data is a commodity. This is very simple. I must say we are there, but it's not interesting for us because we, as Noah said before, we want to be partners in stuff like this because I think that the mutual benefit to being partnering or to this partnership is much higher than just being a shop for data. It's not interesting. obviously there is a need for data. We don't overlook this, and we are there. And if a company comes and wants data, we obviously deal with it. And then obviously the agreement that we developed is tailor-made to the situation. Again, we are a government hospital, and there are rules of IP, the intellectual properties. By the way, we have many startups that are owned by our own staff, that they develop their own ideas. You know, they understand best what are the unmet needs and looking for the solutions. And so more than half of the startups that we work with are starting from our own staff, not only physicians, you know, nursing staff, all the allied medical staff, lots of activity over there. But then again, sometimes, you know, startup comes in and it needs the know-how or to connect the startup to the actual need of the clinicians. So then we basically put a team together, and again, looking at all the agreement and the financial issues around it. We have, through the Rambam MedTech, through the tech transfer company, we create an agreement, and we have plenty of them, and we decide who owns the IP, who basically will have the commercial benefits, and what will be the percentage. And also we are affiliated with Technion. Technion is like the Israeli MIT, and this is a very powerful combination to have the physician and the engineering working together. And though we are two different institutions, we work together, and we always have a solution for the agreement. If the actual researchers and the clinician do not manage to get along, so we have 3 levels of support to make a decision, up to the end when me or the president of the Technion make a decision who owns the IP and how we will share the benefits. So this is how it works, and we believe that we have to be really open-minded. By the way, we have the same system with Stanford, with Memorial Sloan Kettering, with Johns Hopkins, and we work together in many, many things.
So how does that impact, you know, your financial stability of the hospital if you get additional income actually from innovation, either from equity or royalties? Is that could that be characterized as an approach to sustaining the financial situation in the hospital in the times when, you know, global healthcare is becoming financially strained, and we need to look for new ways into how to make it sustainable?
So you mentioned in your opening remark how much money is spent on healthcare in Israel. Only 7.4, 5, 6% of GDP. This, you said it's almost like the European country. No, it's much, much, much less.
I said it's less. So
the
average in Europe is around 9. So Germany is 11, but it's a
exactly.
You know, a high income country. But yeah, so I was surprised by that, because you're known for really good healthcare, relatively high satisfaction rates, a lot of innovation, and compared to many other countries, you invest so much less of the GDP to healthcare.
So there's lots of implication to this, and I can tell you. The meeting after you, I'm fighting with the Ministry of Finance on more money. We're always in huge fights, and this will never end, because, you know, to be a little bit the devil advocate, if you look at the economical issues of a country, there's, you know, one area that you can lose control, look at the states, for instance, is the amount you spend on healthcare. It's basically never enough, but still, I think that Israel is spent much too less, not enough on healthcare. And if you look at efficiency and the Bloomberg level of efficiency, we are 6th in the world in efficiency, which is, to my mind, crazy. So obviously, one of the, I talked about the philosophy of hospital to be involved with innovation. There is also economical side to that, because we forever will fight with the Ministry of Finance. But I believe that we have to look for other sources of money to the hospital. So obviously, one of the things that is not spread worldwide, but in Israel, it's a big thing, is philanthropic money. We bring in about $35 million a year philanthropic money, and lots of the things that we develop here is money not from the government. Just to give you an emphasis, the last couple of months, I bought 2 MRIs, two PET CTs, and 3 cath labs, and the government gave $0 for that. $0 for that. And this is coming from money that we managed to get. So another approach to look at innovation, because I believe that all those work is like roads that you put into the sea, and I'm sure, I have no doubt in my mind that they will mature, and that will create the basic infrastructure of economic situation of the hospital. And we already see the amount of money that it brings in. 4 or 5 years ago, the Rambam MedTech, the tech transfer company, brought few thousands of shekels into the hospitals. Now they bring millions, right? When we talk about industry-supported research, right? This is tens of millions that it brings into the hospital. And this is why, obviously, it's a win-win-win. So, and obviously it gives the best solution for the hospital, because we need to support ourselves.
Thank you. By opening up the question of the fight between the sectors, you lighten up the mood for sure. And I just want to tell our 3 speakers from Israel that in the next sections, I will ask you, what do you see as the biggest challenges in Israel in terms of the digital health strategy and, the future of digitalization. So we'll discuss that also, and you can prepare a little bit. In the meantime, Mr. Shorley, a lot was said about how innovation is done on the hospital level in Israel. So I would like to hear your comment about the situation, and also what are your possibilities to encourage innovation on the clinician side, and actually collaborate even with the industry to do research to innovate.
Our strategy is almost the same as it was explained from the colleague from Israel. But you have to know that at the beginning, it is important how the system is financed, not just the amount of the money. That if you have poor data, what is behind those 7.5 or 8% of GDP, it's almost impossible to compare the amount of money spent, because from the same, let's say, virtual money, the different things can be financed. In our hospital, predominantly, we try to get a startup company or the company which already has a product which meets the needs of our hospital. For instance, the way of collecting patient data, the way of analyzing data, the way of distributing data around, or things like that. And when we find a company, we try to make a sort of the project or the new startup in which we put our knowledge in the data from the hospital, and mainly the other company gives the technicalia that we need for the system. With that, we reduce the costs of buying system on the market, and that's the main, let's say, income or the saving, the money we have. But we are quite small hospital with just 100 beds. So those innovation will result in also financial better outcome in the future. So building a good infrastructure at the beginning will give us opportunity to improve the outcome of the treatment, will improve the outcome of decision making, in that also reduce the costs for the treatment, and with that we can also then compete on the market for the patient or for the other ways of payment for the treatment. That's the main reason why we're doing or why we're improving our system. As I already mentioned, the quality of data is very important, and that's one of the things, as was already mentioned from the representative from the government. It's also goal of the future development of the digital system in Slovenia. With that system, we'll be able to compare the same things all over the Slovenia, and the results will be the same. Now we have a sort of GDR-driven system, but because of that, also the data is influenced by the system. And I hope in the future those things are going to change, and the data will be more, let's say, useful for the treatment of the patient and for the decision making. And that's how we try to do the things. I think we have a long way in front of us. We have a lot of things to improve, but without a proper data, we won't be able to follow the future needs of medical system. One of the important things is also the treating patient according to the evidence-based medicine, because evidence-based medicine is decision-making regarding data collected in a very well-defined environment. Collecting data then in a free environment is going to be important for changing those now evidence-based way to treating patient, and also improve the treatment results. And that's important, because what we see is that's a wide difference between real life and the pharmaceutical studies.
So what exactly are you missing in terms of innovation and opportunities that you have as a hospital provider?
First of all, we need cornerstones in the treatment which has to be fulfilled. For instance, before starting certain treatment, collecting an appropriate data to do that with larger number of data is also a decision better, and will give us opportunity to treat the right patient with the right medication.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tushar, a comment?
I would just like to add something, a thought maybe about the innovative practices. I think in Slovenia there are many different innovative practices. We have heard about the practices in the hospital in Topolšica, but I think somehow our system is somehow very rigid. So these innovative practices they have troubles to be implemented into the system. And especially the next problem is, of course, founding of these new innovative practices, because we need to put them somehow into a systematic way into the system to be able to be financed. So having in mind our new strategy for the digitalization, we really wish that the strategy is not going to be just a plain paper, but also that there will be solutions that will be really effective, flexible, that will be innovative, but that could be also implemented into the system, and that there will be enough finances in the next year that these practices can practically live on in the field of in clinical practices, let's say.
Can you perhaps share anything in terms of how the strategy is being prepared, and when do you expect it to be finalized, at least to the first version?
Well, we expect that the first version of the strategy will be pointed out in the end of this year. The process is a long-term process. We are now building, or we have a working group dealing with the new strategy. This is quite a big group from different stakeholders in Slovenia. And of course, there is a help of GD Reform experts who will analyze the system in Slovenia and bring us and help us with building the new way we are going forward in the next year. So yes, we are expecting some results by the end of this year, because it is very important having in mind also the resilience and recovery plan that the European Commission has adopted for Slovenia. There are quite a lot of funds for digitalization of the healthcare system. So we will have to be very brief and very strict by making the strategy. So I think this is going to be a good process in the future.
Thank you. Perhaps Ms. Esti, can you share any of the advice on how you approach the write-up of the strategy? Are you also working with external advisors? How is that going?
We do work with external advisors sometimes, but we do believe, I must say, that what we have saw from our experience, that there is no replacement to working with the field, with the hospitals, with HMOs. The knowledge is not within the external advisors. The knowledge is within the industry, the clinicians, and the people that are working on these fields, and they have their own experience and insights. It's really, sometimes it's become very intensive to have many meetings and many visits to the different places, but I must say that we just wrote like a new program for the next few years, and we did it on our own manpower. We had some support outside, but again, in the end of the day, the insights are coming from Noah and from Mickey and from their colleagues, not from any external company that's doing actually the same thing as interviewing them. So I would prefer to hear Noah firsthand and not someone else interviewing Noah to hear what she's thinking about working with the industry. If I may relate to the issue of the next challenges.
Yes, absolutely.
I think one of the challenges, and this is, it's maybe a very Israeli challenge, but we are very good in being a startup nation in a way. And we are very good in innovating and finding all kinds of solutions for the short term. And I think one of the major challenges that we are facing now, and I'm saying it also as part of my organization, is how we are moving to a more mature innovation ecosystem. How we make sure that those solutions or those collaborations with startup and industry are moving to become more evidence-based medicine and part of the medicine, and not become as part of something that's happening, outside of the clinical sphere, or become just part of clinical trial. We want to see it as part of our routine clinical work in the health organizations, and also how we understand and measure better the economic impact of those interventions. As Dr. Halbertal mentions, the resources in Israel are very scarce, and that's a huge challenge, because digital health solutions can be really attractive and look very good, but not necessarily bring ROI or return of investment in terms of public health, okay? Not in terms of investment for the investors, but in terms of our public funds. because I would just give one very intuitive example from telemedicine services. For example, if my visit to my primary care physician become a pre-visit in a way, because if I'm doing a telehealth visit with my physician, and then in the end of the meeting, let's say 80% of the times he's asking me to come to the clinic for a visit or to schedule an appointment at the clinic, we don't have enough resources to have both meetings in place. Maybe we should say, okay, primary care physician need to be a physical visit. It's not suitable for a telehealth visit. Just an example, of course, in this example, we see many times that the telehealth visits can give value, but we need to know how to measure the impact, the economic impact of using those different digital health solutions, and to choose which interventions we would like to adopt and to adopt in a national level. And some of them won't be adopted national levels, although they can be Israeli technologies and they can be very attractive technologies. Digital health need to be a method a method to help us to improve the clinical services and not the aim itself. That's something that I think is very important to mention when we are thinking about the future of digital health. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Esti. And now I'd like to go to Noah. You know, we talked so much about startups, how you work with them, how interesting solutions they have, but we haven't mentioned any examples. So before you go to the question of what do you see as the current challenges in digital health, can you perhaps mention a few projects that you're supporting in Maccabi, testing out and using in healthcare?
Sure. So it also relates to the challenges that we have. So I'll give one sentence about the challenge, and I will share with you an example that that explains how we dealt with such a challenge. So we do see, I very much relate to what Esti said, because there is a challenge in navigating within all these great opportunities and startups and ideas, and knowing how to choose the right solution to the right use case in a way that will bring up real value to as many patients as possible, and will make us will help us to synthesize the right and the clear, impactful insight from that specific startup, or an innovation. Doesn't have to be a startup. And I can bring two examples of how we did such a choice, and we looked at. It took us time to find the right use case for a technology or an idea, but once we found the right use cases, and we implemented them. It's amazing and impactful solution. The first one is something that we did with the finding suspected patients that are suspected in opioids addiction or abuse. And what we did, we took the data of known patients that are addicted to opioids, the use of opioids, and we looked at the data, and we found the patterns that tell us which patient is suspected and is going in that way of getting abused, and we took these parameters we talked here about secondary data and the use of data, and how do we take it, and we found this case, and we found out that if we take these parameters and we run them using AI and other sophisticated algorithms on our patients, we can identify those patients that are about to get into that area. And the data is varied, so it can be demographic and behavioral and all kinds of information. We see patients that purchase the drugs in many pharmacies. We see their visits for different doctors to get a prescription, and other also demographics. And once we have this detection, we put together an alert for the doctor. It's a primary physician usually, that when the patient is visiting him in this ongoing meeting, the alert comes up and pops up the possibility that this patient is suspected to be using opioids in a wrong way. And here comes the second element that we must do after we find the right use case to implement a technology or innovation, and it's about how do we let's say facilitate this idea to the end user, to the doctor in this case. And this is another big challenge we're facing. And there must be two things that we must do. One, we must explain our user, doctor in this case, what exactly is C. So a technology that is or innovation that is a black box for him is problematic, because we have a trust issue, and if the doctor doesn't understand what's behind these numbers and these solutions or suggestions, he won't play with us, okay? So this is one thing, is finding a way to explain to the doctor what this technology does, but in a simple and short way. It doesn't have time to read the articles now, okay? This is one thing. And the second thing is providing practical guidance on this event, okay? So providing possible actions for intervention in the case of opioids that we did. So at this point, when we say, okay, the algorithm, the technology found that this patient is about to is suspected in drug abuse, we also give him the explanation, why do we think so? How did the algorithm go there? And then we also give him we hand for him practical possible actions for intervention that he can just click and start rolling out. And this is two elements that we found that are very important in any implementation or innovation that we bring into our EHR or other tools that must be there to gain the success. And again, it goes back to the challenge that we face. I sometimes call it a digital adoption. Okay, so it's about it's more let's say a behavioral and a way for us to bring this innovation. Our clients, the doctors, the clinicians, the patients, it's overloaded with all kinds of possibilities, tons of possibilities. They don't know what's right, what's wrong, what's evidence-based, as this said, what they can trust and what they should do with this great innovation. And this is where we come in here in the digital health, medical informatics in Maccabi and the HO to be this bridge between the innovation and the startups and all kinds of AI, very, very smart, or other algorithms and technologies to our end users, to make it a practical solution in our daily life. I can give another example.
I think we're slowly going to run out of time. So thanks a lot, for a very comprehensive overview of a few challenges. We still haven't heard from Mr. Halbertal. So maybe just a few challenges that you would like to point out, and maybe just since you're the last speaker and we're going to have to wrap up after you can end with something that you're optimistic about. So, we can leave this discussion in an energized manner.
So I think that one of the challenges that we have is how we share the information. I believe in teamwork. I believe that the added benefit of all of us joining up together and tackling a problem or getting a solution for unmet needs it's very important. I believe in collaboration. And one of the problems that we have when we look at about digital or data of medical data is the issues of privacy that we spoke about together before. And no doubt one of the challenges is if we want to work together and create solution is how we can take our data and take your data and share it together and take all the information, because then it will be much more versatile, much more accurate. You can tailor-make the solution, and it's a big problem. And this is a major issue of sharing the information. And I think that also us and Maccabi are involved with the Israeli. It used to be a startup when we started it. We used to be the beta site of this company. Now it's obviously not a startup anymore. But MD Clone is a company that gave an unbelievable solution for this. MD Clone started as a startup and did few things. The first thing that they've done is they built a search engine, a very easy to use search engine into the data. All of us know that if we want to go and to do research, and us as clinicians, we need to go to the IT people, give them the question, they need to understand the question, and it takes huge periods between until you get the information and the solution. And in our time, you don't have the time. We have to work extremely quickly. We cannot waste all the resources. So they built an amazing research engine. The second thing, they used an algorithm, and initially they looked at anonymization of the data. But at the end of the day, this is not good enough, because still in certain cases, you can go back to a patient. So what they've done, they've made another algorithm that takes the actual data and make it a synthetic data that you cannot connect back to a patient. So when you want to check concept, you can take this data and get, using the search engine, having all your questions, and this can be done extremely quickly. And once we have a synthetic data, we can use data from my institution, Maccabi. We work together using the same method and getting all the data together and getting more unbelievable information. This is a huge advancement of cooperation. And I think that and we have an amazing outcome. We just had a meeting with them this morning, and I think that this is one of the challenges and where the future, where the world is going to. We have to ensure to work out of silos, go work together, use the data, get solution, and I think that this is we are there almost, and I think that this is very important, and to be optimistic. I am optimistic by nature. Otherwise, when you work in the healthcare industries, and I'm sure you have the same problem like us, if you are not born optimistic, you cannot wake up in the morning. So and I believe that we have, obviously in Israel, unbelievable healthcare system. I know that Slovenia has the same unbelievable healthcare system. And I think that sitting here together and discussing those things and listening to what you said, and I'm sure listening to what we have said, I think that I'm optimistic.
Thank you. Definitely a lot of positive energy to finalize this discussion. So I would like to thank all the speakers that have joined us from Israel, the two speakers that are here with us in the studio, and of course to everyone who joined us remotely to follow this discussion on Zoom. We are done this week with discussions about different healthcare systems and digitalization in Europe. We still have one day to go tomorrow. It's going to be focused on digital literacy in healthcare. The whole day is going to be in Slovene, so that's a side note to keep in mind. And as for the discussions that happened in the past, especially the panel discussions about healthcare discussions, I will publish those also on the Faces of Digital Health podcast. So if you missed any of the discussions are interested in hearing what we talked about, you will be able to hear that. Thank you again. My name is Tjasa Zajc. I was moderating this discussion, and I wish everyone a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you.